The Raimi Spider-Man universe has some pretty great depictions of Spider-Man villains, but sometimes you do wonder about the wider world of this story and wonder what other villains are out there. A thought that luckily is answered in the films and other tie-in material. There are many instances in the Raimi Spider-Man films where this particular character appears. In Spider-Man 1, he's a commentator for the special wrestling event Peter attends. In Spider-Man 2, he works as an employee at the local theater. And in Spider-Man 3, he works as a server at a restaurant. Now, the obvious explanation for these is that this is simply just Bruce Campbell doing many cameos in each film. However, as we later come to discover years later, this character is actually Quinton Beck, aka Mysterio, who would have possibly been played by Bruce Campbell. This does raise the question, if this character really was Quinton Beck, why was he taking on so many different kinds of jobs? Well, there's many potential explanations. 1. Quinton was a man down on his luck and struggled to maintain employment, a fact I'm sure many of you can relate to. 2. He's very broke and needs to work multiple jobs just to pay his bills. 3. These are all twin brothers. Or 4. Quinton, using his skills in acting, takes on the role of a worker at various companies. The purpose? To gather information about the place and then eventually rob them blind, moving on to the next location when he's done. This is the most unlikely option, but hey, I think it's the coolest possible answer we could go for. In Spider-Man, the new animated series, Spider-Man has a brief run-in with the Kingpin, who is voiced by the actor Michael Clark Duncan, who plays Kingpin in the Daredevil film. Now, the interesting thing is that the new animated series was originally meant to tie into the first Spider-Man movie, and since Duncan voices Kingpin here, it's not far-fetched to say that Kingpin in the show is the same one seen in the film, which should mean that Daredevil exists in the Raimi universe as well. We do run into a bit of a problem, however, when we have to factor in the film's novelization. You see, in the novel, we find out that this wrestler here is actually Jack Murdock, and in the book, he calls his son Matt Murdock to tell him about his encounter with Peter. If we are to believe that Matt is a child in this call, it does raise a question about the timeline. Jack Murdock usually dies around the time Matt is 10, give or take a few years. He usually becomes Daredevil in his early to mid-20s. If we were to add this into the timeline, this would mean that Matt is a child during the events of Raimi's Spider-Man. If he becomes Daredevil in about 12 years, that means that the Daredevil movie should be set in 2014, which of course doesn't make any sense when you think about it. As we all know, Eddie Brock was present during the events of the first Spider-Man movie. He works for the Daily Bugle, and based on dialogue, he's one of Jameson's most trusted photographers.
Problem is, we don't have a decent picture. Eddie's been on it for weeks. We can barely get a glimpse of him.
In a deleted scene, Eddie would have been played by R.C. Everbeck, who in the sequence is clearly annoyed at Peter for obtaining Spider-Man photos that he couldn't. This dynamic would mean that if kept in, Eddie in this universe would be very similar to his comic counterpart, a man fueled by jealousy and resentment towards Peter, likely going into Spider-Man 2 until he becomes Venom in the third movie, a transformation which would have been much more impactful considering that we would have been following his story ever since the first movie. Curt Connors is the most popular hidden villain in the Raimi universe. Well, not really hidden, as he's a pretty notable side character. As we all know in the comics, Connors creates a formula to regrow his hands using lizard DNA, causing him to transform into the lizard. In the Raimi timeline, however, Connors is still missing his arm, and there seems to be no attempt from him to create the formula. There's many reasons for this. Perhaps at the time of the movies, he's still in deep research about it. Or maybe he's never gonna pursue this research to begin with. Wendell Strom is a villain known as the Robot Master, a scientist who works closely with Norman Osborn. In the comics, Osborn ultimately betrays Strom and frames him for crimes he did not commit, resulting in Strom being sent to prison. From there, fully turns against Osborn and, using his expertise in robotics, builds an army of robots and experiments on himself to take revenge. In the Raimi films, Strom plays a much smaller role. He's one of Oscorp's lead scientists and assists in the development of various advanced technologies, including Norman's performance enhancer. His presence implies involvement in many of Oscorp's high-tech weapons, suggesting that this version of Strom also possesses high expertise in robotics and engineering, something he could possibly nurture into becoming Robot Master in this timeline. However, this never occurs, as instead of being framed or imprisoned, Strom is outright killed by Norman. This means that he'd never have a chance to become Robot Master in this timeline. Last, there is John Jameson, who becomes Man-Wolf in the comics thanks to coming across a strange gem from outside of Earth. John Jameson has many varying personas in the comics, so it's not definitive which role he'd take on in this world.